versus Ugas. Let's talk about the fight. So many thoughts ahead of this thing, so many thoughts afterwards.
A lot of us thought Ugas was injured.
Going into this fight sporting some kind of injury, I don't know, some kind of situation with Yordenis Ugas' left bicep and what appeared to be a protrusion or swelling. Your guess is as good as mine.
What the fuck was going on with that guy's arm?
Even now, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the state of Yordenis Ugas' left arm was at that weigh-in. I'm not sure what was going on in those images that were circulating leading up to the fight. I just know that whatever it was, it didn't stop him from winning this fight.
Let's talk about what we saw.
I don't know about you guys and what your take on Yordenis Ugas was ahead of this fight, but I myself viewed him as a very formidable fighter ahead of this fight, and I talked about that in a previous video. I'll leave the link to it in the description box. He's got height on Manny, reach on Manny, youth on Manny, can box on the outside and bang on the inside when it's appropriate. I think that's what we saw in this fight. Had Manny Pacquiao picking up the first round on activity. He seemed to be the busier puncher throughout. His combinations really stood out to me. I scored the second round for Yordenis Ugas behind the jab, maintaining distance, and the straight shots. He was very poised throughout. I had Manny Pacquiao picking up the third round.
Ugas picking up the fourth.
Having held his own in the pocket, deep in the pocket, landed some very good uppercuts in that round, and the jab of Yordenis Ugas troubled Manny Pacquiao. It became clear very early that Yordenis Ugas' jab and his straight shots, the way he's controlling the distance, it was a factor. It was troubling Manny Pacquiao between the straight shot and the discrepancy in size. That Ugas is the taller fighter, and he is the younger fighter. He's exhibiting that jab. He's
neutralizing some of Manny's aggression.
Stopping him at the door at times before Manny would get to enter into the pocket. Manny, being the shorter fighter, the smaller fighter, he's got to enter into the pocket before he can do anything. He's got to step into the pocket just to touch Yordenis Ugas with punches, and Yordenis created a situation to where, you got to get around that jab before you can do that. So I had Ugas picking up the fourth round, Pacquiao picking up the fifth on activity. More clean shots than Yordenis Ugas in that round. That was the fifth round. The sixth round, I had that a swing round. Even effort from both men. I decided to swing it to Ugas. I felt that round we saw very good ring generalship from Yordenis Ugas, but we still saw a lot of activity from Pacquiao. Still a lot of activity from Manny. At this point, I had it about 3 rounds to 3 through the first half of the fight. 3 for Manny, 3 for Yordenis Ugas. And Manny Pacquiao picking up the subsequent 7th round on activity. The jab of Ugas was still troubling Manny, though there was visible damage to Ugas' left eye. So I had Manny picking up the 7th. The 8th round seemed like a swing round to me. Very tight round. Could have gave it to Manny, could have gave it to Ugas. I decided to give it to Manny, thinking the judges would give it to Manny. We know how partial judges can be whenever there's a marquee fighter in the ring. Ugas was holding his own, inside and outside of the pocket in that round. Very good exchanges.
9th round was a tight round, too.
Those 2 rounds right there, the 8th and the 9th, those are rounds that, I could see somebody giving those rounds to Ugas. I just wasn't sure. Manny Pacquiao being the marquee fighter.
You expect the generosity.
Oftentimes, that's what we see in the sport of boxing. The 8th and 9th rounds really stood out to me as tight rounds, close rounds. Manny Pacquiao picked up the 10th on my card, as Yordenis Ugas looked like he was slowing down a bit there.
Ugas picked up the 11th.
And the 12th. And based on that scorecard, it could have been Pacquiao 7-5 with 2, maybe even 3 swing rounds. And with those swing rounds, if you swing them the other way, you swing them to Ugas.
7-5 to 8-4.
I take no issue with Yordenis Ugas being awarded the decision because there were tight rounds, very tight rounds there, where you wondered if Ugas would get consideration from the judges, where you wondered if they wouldn't just go ahead and swing those rounds to Manny because, he's Manny. Would they favor Manny's aggression and his combination punching, or the poise, the range control, and the jab? The efficiency of Yordenis Ugas, essentially.
Because he was efficient.
He wasn't going out there wasting punches, and he wasn't moving incessantly the way that his countryman, Guillermo Vergandia, did last week in the Casemiro fight. No. We saw a lot of good ring generalship from Ugas, and I just wondered,
is he going to get a fair shake?
Because Yordenis Ugas is fighting a fight of finesse, are the judges going to appreciate that? Are they going to take that into consideration? I wondered that throughout the course of this fight, and apparently they did. They gave him the decision. Keys to victory for Ugas was his range control and using that jab, using that lead hand, which we all thought was compromised ahead of this fight. We all thought he was injured. Something's wrong with his bicep. You know, I don't know if it was. I don't know if it wasn't. I just know that he used that lead hand to keep Manny just on the outside of striking distance.
He used his length.
Very poised, very controlled, employing the lead hand to keep the shorter man out as to not allow the shorter man to come on strong, have it all his way. Yordenis Ugas was very poised throughout the course of this fight. There were moments where they get into exchanges. And I told you guys, Yordenis Ugas is not your, according to Hoyle, Cuban fighter who's limited to fighting behind straight shots. No, he can bang in the inside as well.
Yeah, we saw that in the Figueroa fight.
Another testament to the greatness of none other than Ismael Salas as a trainer who helped prepare Yordenis Ugas for this fight, helped Joe Joyce prepare for the Daniel Dubois fight, helped Kazuto Ioka prepare for the Kosei Tanaka fight.
I think they redeemed Cuban school boxing with this one.
And it needed redeeming after Guillermo Rigondeaux's stinker last week.
Don't give me the song and dance about how that was some kind of masterclass.
Really was one of the more awful fights I've seen in recent memory. Ugas' performance last night did a great service to Cuban school boxing. Redeemed it in many ways. Poise, range control, usage of the lead hand, asserting himself when necessary in the pocket should Manny Pacquiao get under and or around the straight shots.
That was important too.
That when necessary, Yordenis Ugas was able to fight fire with fire, that he wasn't limited to fighting behind his jab and fighting behind straight shots to keep Manny out of the pocket, that if by some chance Manny should make it there, get within striking distance, Ugas was able to fight him off.
I think he earned that WBA title in a lot of people's eyes last night.
Congratulations to him. Because Ugas was elevated to champion in the process of the WBA stripping Manny Pacquiao of the title.
There were a lot of people that felt he hadn't earned it.
But he did last night. Did Manny Pacquiao suddenly get old overnight? Did Father Time finally catch up to the Pac-Man? Well, I wouldn't rule that out completely, though I wouldn't dismiss the strategy on Yordenis Ugas' part either. You know, maintaining distance the way that he did, jabbing at Manny Pacquiao as to not allow him to amass momentum.
Start thinking he's going to have it all his way.
I mean, maybe it's a combination of things. A bit of strategy from Ugas and Father Time catching up to Manny. I just look at the situation as a situation to where if Manny were going to negotiate that fight successfully, he would have needed to be more explosive, fight in bursts more, double up and triple up on that jab as you close the gap on Ugas to keep his guns holstered while you get close to him. Plant some shots to the body, some shots downstairs. The kind that, you know, you don't recover from so easily.
Nobody likes it to the body.
And even fewer can weather those shots, recover from them successfully. I look at the aesthetic of last night's fight and I tell myself that it's a combination of things because you really can't dismiss that Manny Pacquiao is 42, going on 43 years old, 2 years removed from the sport, in there with a bigger guy, a younger guy who's hit his stride, he's in his prime, and he's employing the right strategy, using his God-given gifts.
His height, his reach, his length.
His boxing. There was some talk post-fight from the reigning champion, Yordenis Ugas, that Manny Pacquiao has the right to invoke a rematch if he wants one, and a legend like him deserves it. The very gracious, always very thankful Yordenis Ugas. I'm pretty sure he'd like to swap punches with Manny again, because there's an obvious payday associated with it.
Right.
You know, I really think this is it for Manny. I mean, he had a speech prepared for the post-fight press conference, and you just got the sense that this is it. You know, Manny should have hung it up a long time ago, and I've been saying that for years. You know, he could have retired off that victory over Keith Thurman. What a swan song that would have been.
I would have preferred if he had.
With his status still intact, I mean, you don't see very many happy endings when it comes to boxing, not when fighters retire, because usually it's not the fighter that retires, it's the sport that retires the fighter. We saw that in the Hopkins fight, we saw that in the Cotto fight. Those guys' last outings, their swan songs.
I feel like we're seeing that here with Manny.
So, Yordenis Ugas earns the right to call himself the rightful WBA welterweight champion by taking on and defeating Manny Pacquiao. I reiterate, I have no issues with the judges' scorecards, their decisions. There were a couple of tight rounds there. They could have went either way. They decided to swing those rounds Ugas' way, and it just is what it is.
It's the end of an era.
I really do hope that this is the end of Manny Pacquiao's storied career and all the fabled success that he's had. That, you know, many fighters, you know, they'd be lucky to have a quarter of the success that Manny Pacquiao has had as a fighter. They'd be so lucky. They should be so lucky. And I just think it's time to hang them up. I thought it was time to hang them up for a long time now.
Started sounding like a broken record.
The feeling that, you know, a lot of these young guys, they don't really want to do the dance with each other as much because you have a name like Manny Pacquiao still floating around in the back of their minds. They're going to make that a priority. And, it's the weirdest thing because if you would have told me a year ago that Manny Ugas are going to fight, that Ugas is going to end up landing a fight like this, I would have told you were crazy. I would have told you Ugas just isn't on Manny Pacquiao's radar. But boxing and the cosmos, stars aligning, they just have a way of making things happen that you didn't think would happen.
Yeah, I didn't think Ugas was going to get this fight.
But he did, and it's a career best win for him. Post-fight, after beating Manny Pacquiao, Yordenis Ugas said he'd like to fight Errol Spence Jr. next. Who would win that fight? Reply to for Yordenis Ugas, like for Errol Spence Jr. And, this is what I expected. I mean, he's calling out Errol Spence Jr., who is now reported to be recovering from that eye injury. An injury that could keep him out of action for 6 months to a year.
Right.
As is customary after any fight, the fans often find themselves asking, well, what is next for the victor? In that way, what's next for Yordenis Ugas? He's saying he wants Spence next, but we don't actually know when Spence is going to come back. So if Ugas fights someone else, who would it be, since he didn't mention Terrence Crawford?
He's not entertaining that fight.
I never expected him to. I mean, you guys have heard me say on more than one occasion that I've given up on the welterweight division as far as enthusiasm and excitement for what is going on because of what isn't. Spence being out, possibly, for 6 months to a year, Yordenis Ugas still has him in his crosshairs, but it's possible he doesn't get him within that time frame. That opens up two separate scenarios. It's either Ugas sits out the duration of time that Spence sits out, waiting for that unification match, or he has an interim fight in between. Who against? Well, they did have a very past-it Victor Ortiz and Robert Guerrero as the chief support to this fight. Maybe Ugas keeps busy with the winner, or the loser. There's no quality control over there, so neither would surprise me.
Nothing really does these days.
The situation with Errol Spence Jr. is so unstable that I don't actually know what's going to happen there. I don't know if in the amount of time that Errol Spence Jr. is out, the IBF decide to strip him because he's unable to defend his IBF title. I don't know if this guy comes back at all to the welterweight division. I mean, what if he is out for a year? Can he still make welterweight after a year's time? Can he make it healthy, fighting fit? A lot of people already think he's damaged goods. A lot of people have relegated.
They think he's a broken fighter.
He seems to be on a very similar schedule to Keith Thurman, who we all know is a injury-prone and sparsely active fighter. If you think about it, Errol fought Sean Porter in September of 2019. He was out for a year due to the car accident. He comes back in December, late last year, against Danny Gersha. It looks like Errol won't be fighting at all this year, so he's pretty much lost the entire year of 2021 if the prognosis sticks, and he's out for 6 months to a year.
No fights in 2021.
And this is who Ugas is looking to for his next challenge. This is who Ugas is looking to for his next fight. The instability of Errol Spence Jr. directly affects what happens next for Yordenis Ugas, because that's who he wants. And that's the next best thing to a cash fight for Ugas. He already had the big Pacquiao fight. He doesn't seem to be entertaining a Crawford fight in any respect. I'm going to be honest. The welterweight division has left a bad taste in my mouth for more reasons than one. You got a fighter like Keith Thurman, right?
Right.
This guy, he sat out the last 2 years. No tune-up fight last year that would have left him primed to have a bigger fight this year. No fight date in sight, aside from some call-outs he's issued out to Gervonta Davis, a super lightweight, to send him a contract. This is the welterweight division. Sean Porter's all tied up with the Crawford stuff. We don't even know where we are with that. This past Friday was supposed to be the deadline for those two guys to reach a deal, but we didn't hear anything from the WBO this Friday. Don't know if we will hear anything this upcoming Monday. It's just a division that doesn't excite me anymore, doesn't really even have my attention, my enthusiasm, or my patronage.
I'm just bored with it.
I can't overlook how much isn't happening and how much is not feasible due to the current state of welterweight. Keith Thurman, it's not likely he entertains fights with guys like, Jaron Boots Ennis or Virgil Ortiz, who's a Golden Boy Promotions fighter that's currently fighting on DAZN, so you can throw that right out the window. Because he hasn't fought in 2 years, because he hasn't rebounded off the loss to Manny Pacquiao, because he hasn't had a tune-up fight, How likely is it that he might fight Yordenis Ugas next?
I really don't know.
I mean, I'm just not entertained by the welterweight division anymore. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to apologize for it. Even last night's fight, all the intrigue associated with Pacquiao versus Ugas had everything to do with Manny's age, his inactivity, and what many people interpreted as a bicep injury on Yordenis Ugas' left arm. So if there was intrigue there, it was intrigue that was there for the wrong reasons. It's not intrigue in association with two peak athletes coming together to make a super fight the way it was with Canelo and Gennady Golovkin. It's not a situation like that. All the intrigue associated with this fight had everything to do with the physical state of the fighters and what might be working against them as opposed to what might be working for them.
Like in the Thurman fight.
In the Thurman fight, what I found myself wondering was, is Manny Pacquiao too old to beat a guy like this? Or is Keith Thurman just a shadow of what he used to be, and now all he is an injury-prone fighter? I mean, all the intrigue in association with that fight had everything to do with what might be working against the fighters as opposed to what might be working for them. And the same applies here. And this has been the welterweight division.
What Spence versus Danny Garcia was all about.
Getting your first look at Errol Spence Jr., post-car accident, post-surgery, getting a look at this guy and seeing what's left, assessing if he's still the same fighter that he used to be. I mean, that was the whole appeal of that fight, because Danny hasn't done anything remarkable as a welterweight. He's a semi-solid fighter that serviced as a litmus test for Errol Spence Jr., and I'm just not excited about any of this stuff.
When that's what the hubbub's all about.
Not when the selling point of a fight is whether or not a guy's too old, or is a guy injured, or is he damaged goods. I mean, seriously.
That's what the selling point was for all of those fights.
Really wasn't peak athlete versus peak athlete at their best. And that's why, look, this division for me is just a dud.
Just being honest.